Football season is right around the corner. I don't know if anybody else is excited about that. It sounds like a lot of you. That's great. Fantastic. I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan, so I have no earthly idea why I'm excited about it. Always a few of us just glutton for punishment. As a Cowboy fan, my dad was a Cowboy fan. I'm a Cowboy fan. I have drugged my 5 children into being Cowboy fans. I had to teach them some really significant life lessons up front about being a Dallas Cowboy fan. And at some point, you have to identify as a Cowboy fan, and there's just a lot of hate for us, right? And rightfully so. I can understand it. And so my kids, we rally around when the games are going to be on, and we watch. And when the Cowboys lose, which has been a lot here recently, what happens is they don't want to go to school the next day. And they're like, man, our friends are just going to pound us, man. And some of them even getting texts through the game. And so we just had to learn the lesson up front. Like, listen, if you're only going to be a Cowboy fan when they're winning, number one, it's going to be rare. Number two, that's called bandwagon. And we're not going to do that. We're not just cheering for a team when they're doing great. And so here's the deal. You really want to own it. You want to show your loyalty. You want to show where it's at. This is how you do it. You wear your Cowboy hoodie on Monday after a Sunday loss. And you walk into that school, chest out, chin up, and like, yes, I'm a Cowboy fan. And yes, we lost, and I'm good. Nobody cares if you wear the gear when they're winning, right? There's a lot of Houston Astros hats in Houston right now, right? My question is, what's going to happen when they're not winning or in the World Series? Where do those hats go? They go in the drawer, they go in a hat rack, and we just kind of distance ourselves. At some point, you've got to declare your loyalty to the group, not just when times are good, but when times are hard, when times are rough. You wear the jersey, you wear the hoodie, you wear the gear. As we think about today, the idea that our faith and our dedication and our loyalty to Jesus Christ is not just when things are great, but also when things are hard. And not only that, but our identification with the body, the church, this thing called the community, is a vital part of what we do. And so today we're going to spend some time looking at a guy named Moses in Hebrews 11. We've been working our way through Hebrews 11 and all these men and women of faith. And we have noticed to this point there's been this individual nature about it, like build the boat, or Enoch walked with God, or Abel offered a sacrifice, or Abraham accepted the promise and left the land. It's all individual. But today Moses is going to identify with the people of God. And he's not just going to identify with the people of God because things are great. He is going to identify with the people of God even in their suffering, even in their hardship, even in their loss. And it's got a great challenge to us. So let's take off reading in Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to start in verse 23. I'm going to read most of these verses about Moses. I can't get to all of them, so we'll pick up some next week. So this is what it says starting in verse 23. It says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Now, that one's not really about Moses. That's about his parents, but we're going to come back to that here in a moment. Verse 24, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Verse 25, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. There's some loyalty. He's making a choice. Who is he going to identify with? Pharaoh and Egypt, or the people of God? Then it says this in verse 26, choosing the reproach of Christ, or considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. And by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. You can see it there. There's this corporate nature. Clearly, Moses is making a decision. Do I hang out with my adoptive family in Egypt, or do I identify with the people who are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, my kindred? So let's go back to verse 23. Let's start in this, and I'm just going to be honest with you. We're going to bounce around today. So if you got a few fingers and you can shove them in like Exodus chapter 2, Acts chapter 7, you're just going to have to put your big boy pants on and seatbelt. We're going to flip around a little bit, all right? right? So here we go. Let's go back to verse 23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Now, what gets us to this point? Remember, the people reading this for the first time would have known the story of Moses really well. Some of us know it, but just as a refresher, let me remind you what gets to this point. Abraham, who we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, was given a promise, and that promise was that he was going to be a great nation. The problem is that Abraham had no children to become a great nation. He finally is blessed with Isaac. God looks at Isaac and says, that promise I made to your daddy, I'm making to you. You're going to be a great nation, lots of descendants. Isaac has a couple of boys, and God wrestles with Jacob and says, hey, here's the deal. You are going to be a great nation, just like I told your granddad and just like I told your dad. And so Jacob takes it really seriously, and he falls in love with a woman named Rachel, but he's fooled into having to marry his sister Leah. And so Jacob begins to have these 2 wives, and they have a baby-making competition, and they have 12 sons. 12 sons, right? And they also bring a couple of other ladies into the fold. It's a story for another time. 12 sons. One of those sons is named Joseph, and Joseph is the favorite son of Jacob because Rachel, the woman he really loves, it's the firstborn son from Rachel. All the other brothers hate Joseph, and so when they get the opportunity, they think, hey, let's get rid of him, let's kill him. And then they think, well, let's not kill him, let's send him to Egypt. So he gets sold into slavery in Egypt, and over a crazy set of circumstances, he becomes number 2 in charge. And when he becomes number 2 in charge, he then brings his family back together. He reconciles with his brothers. I don't have time to tell the whole story. It's amazing. Genesis 35 to 50, go read it this week. And they all come together, and he moves his dad back, and then Joseph dies, and also the Pharaoh that Joseph was buddies with dies. In the meantime, all of Joseph's brothers are still having babies and kids, and these Hebrews, who are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, become so numerous that the new Pharaoh says, no, there's too many of them. So let's make them slaves. And then after they're slaves for a little bit, he says, there's still too many of them. And now what we need to do is if they ever figure out there's more of them than us, they might revolt. So now I need to start killing all the newborn baby boys. And that gets us to Hebrews 11, where it says they weren't afraid of the king's edict. His first attempt to kill all the baby boys didn't work, so his second one was this. Let's just say this is how it's going to work. If it's a boy and they're born of a Hebrew, just throw them into the Nile. If it's a girl, let them live. And so here we have in verse 23 the fact that his parents, Amram and Jochebed, we learn that from a genealogy over here. It says they were not afraid of the king's edict in verse 23. They hid him for 3 months. And here's the reason why. Now, this is the most intriguing part. Because they saw he was a beautiful child. Now, what parent doesn't think their child is beautiful, right? What child doesn't think, oh, I've got a beautiful baby, I'm going to hide him. There's no way I'm going to throw my kid into the Nile. So what in the world is going on here? And this is where we begin to flip back and forth. Got your Bible? Go to Exodus chapter 2. All the author of Hebrews is doing is reminding us of this story that is there. In Exodus chapter 2, we get the story, the original account of Moses' birth. It says this in verses 1 and 2. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. There it is, the exact same thing that we have in Hebrews chapter 11. So she looks at him and says, he's beautiful. The word beautiful in Hebrew is the word tob, which shows up in Genesis chapter 1. You might remember the word as, and God created light and saw that it was tob, good. And he says that over and over and over again, and it was very good. Now, the word in and of itself doesn't tell us anything special about the boy. It doesn't tell us that maybe there was some inner quality or that he was supposed to be something special. It just kind of seems like he must have been an extraordinarily good-looking young man, even as a baby, right? until you get to Acts chapter 7. Is everybody hanging with me? I know I'm going fast. You with me? Just nod your head. Thank you. Go to Acts chapter 7 because we get another account of Moses here. And then Stephen's going to tell us just enough to tell us what's going on with this idea of a beautiful baby. Acts chapter 7. Stephen's fixing to lose his life for the sake of the gospel. He's given a defense. He goes all the way back to Moses and says this in verse 20 of chapter 7. It was at this time that Moses was born, and he was lovely, there it is, but in whose sight this time? God's sight. It's not just lovely to mom. It's not just lovely to people around like, oh, that's a good-looking baby, right? No, it's lovely in the sight of God. And when you're lovely in the sight of God, we know this from like David. God doesn't look at the outward appearance. He looks at So something is unique about Moses. Something is unique here because God looks at him and he's not judging him on the external. Now, here in a moment, I'm going to continue to read, and apparently Moses knew of his call and responsibility to deliver the people from slavery in Egypt before the burning bush. He must have known it beforehand because Acts is going to say he does. So the question is, what is going on? Now, there's a lot I'd love to tell you. I'm going to give you the snippet version here, which I think is how Moses knew he was a deliverer and why he was a beautiful child. In extra biblical material, there's a thing called the Haggadah and the Midrash. And in that, Moses' sister Miriam is said to have had a vision. And she had a vision, and that vision was that Moses was going to be born and deliver the people from Egypt. Now, the Haggadah and the Midrash are not inspired text. I can't say that that's for sure or not, but according to the Haggadah, that Moses had a special calling from even as a baby, not just after he saw the burning bush. And here we see that he's beautiful in the sight of God. No matter what you want to do with that, Moses had a responsibility from his birth for the people of God. God was going to use him to deliver the people from slavery in Egypt. He's going to deliver them. So let's keep reading in Acts chapter 7. What else does Stephen say here to enlighten us about Moses? It says this in verse 21. And after he had been set outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and nurtured him as her own son. You'll remember this. After 3 months, Moses' mom says, I can't throw him into the Nile, so I'm going to make this basket and I'm going to float him down the Nile. And when he gets to Pharaoh's daughter, she picks him up and says, oh, what a beautiful baby. Again, I'm going to raise him as my own. Look at verse 22 of Acts chapter 7. Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power and words and deeds. He was raised as an Egyptian, and the wealth of the Egyptians is legendary. He was raised in the lap of luxury. He knew gold and silver and power. And at this point, this is the greatest civilization on earth. The most powerful man on the planet is Pharaoh, and he's in that house. And not only that, let's just take it one step further. Pharaoh back in those days used to think he was divine. So Moses is being raised with gold, silver, riches, an adoptive family that any of us would want, and even the potential to be high-ranking official one day in Egypt. That's what we got. That's what Stephen is telling us. Then it says this in verse 23. But when he was approaching the age of 40, it entered his mind, Moses, to visit his brethren and the sons of Israel. Now what? Why would we do that? And where in the world does Moses get the idea that he's got family that's not Egyptian? I mean, he was floated down the river at 3 months. How in the world would he know that I have a family that's not just who I see here? Now, if you'll remember, soon as Pharaoh's daughter picked up Moses, she recognized, oh, he's a little and he needs to be nursed. And who followed that basket all the way down the river? Miriam. And Miriam said, oh, I just was passing through. I see you've got a young baby that needs to be nursed. I can go find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. And Miriam runs back, and who does she get to nurse the baby? Moses' mother. And weaning back then probably would have been at least 2 or 3 years. So Moses is going to be with his mother and family for at least 2 or 3 years. And in that time, he's going to build connection with his sister and his mother and find out the story that yes, you're Egyptian, but yes, you're really a Hebrew. And after 40 years, he decides, you know what? Let me go out and see what's happening to him. After 40 years, let me see what's happening to those slaves out there. Who are they? What's going on? Let's go back to Exodus and read it from there, and then we'll come back to what Stephen says. He says this as Moses is retelling the story in Exodus chapter 2. It says in verse 11, "Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up, and he went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren." He looks out there and he sees, this is my family. These are people that I'm related to. This may be what I'm responsible for. And he looks at it, and in verse 12 he says he looked this way and that to see if anybody was looking. And when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He murdered somebody. Absolutely wrong. That's a sermon for another time. He's going to lose his moral authority. It's going to take 40 years to build all that back up, and God's command and a snake, a staff that turns into a snake, like all of that's going to have to happen. But he loses his moral authority here. In verse 13, when he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other, and he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion? Why are you guys fighting your family? We're together. Why are you doing this?" And then look at what happens in verse 14. This is how you know he lost his authority. "Who made you prince or judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." And at that point, he takes off from Midian, and he's going to take care of some sheep for some 40 years before he sees the bush that doesn't consume with fire, and he hears from God. Now, let's go back to Acts chapter 7. I told you, a lot of flipping, but I want to see what Stephen says about this whole event. Let's go back to it. He says this in verse 23. But when he was approaching the age of 40, it entered his mind to visit his brethren, the sons of Israel, verse 24. And when he saw one of them being treated unjustly, he defended him and took vengeance for the oppressed by striking down the Egyptian. We just read that. Verse 25, this is really important. And he supposed that his brethren understood that God was granting them deliverance through him. You see it? Before the burning bush. Before the burning bush. There it is. Moses knew, I have a responsibility for these people. The problem is he went about it the wrong way. He went around it the wrong way. And now he's sitting here saying, I thought they would understand. I thought they would embrace me. I thought they would want me to help deliver them. And they didn't understand, is what he says in verse 25. Verse 26, on the following day he appeared to them as they were fighting together, and he tried to reconcile them in peace, saying, Men, you are brethren. Why do you injure one another? Your family, we're all descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 27, but the one who was injuring his neighbor pushed him away, saying, Who made you ruler and judge over us? You can't have authority over us. Verse 28, you do not mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday, do you? And at this remark, Moses fled and became an alien in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. You say, Russell, that's a lot of reading and reading the same story from 2 different places. Why all of that? Because that little section right there, that one little section of Moses' life is the key to understanding Hebrews chapter 11, what he's going to be commended for. If it were me, I'm probably commending Moses for going to Pharaoh. I'm probably commending Moses for saying, let my people go 10 times. I'm commending him for some other stuff, but he's commending him for the fact that he identified with the people of God. Let's go back and look at it. Hebrews chapter 11. I'm done flipping. We're just going to stay here the rest of the time. You ready? Let's go back and look at verse 23. For by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his family, by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child. He was going to have this responsibility, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And by faith Moses, verse 24, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. When he went out there at age 40 and he looked at his brethren and he identified with them and he said, no, quit fighting. When he went out there and he saw that Egyptian hurting a fellow descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he took matters into his own hands, wrongly at that, he was saying, I'm not an Egyptian. I'm a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what he was doing. He was identifying with the people of God. Now listen, you may not think that's a big deal, but if you're leaving the palace to go hang out with some slaves, you better be firmly convinced at what you're doing. Anybody with me? If you're fixing to leave gold and silver and status and wealth and luxury and comfort and all of that stuff, and you're going to go out there and you're going to put it all on the line to say, hey, man, thank you for raising me and all the opportunities of Egypt. You guys have been great, but at the end of the day, this is my family. And I think the primary reason he did it is because he knew he was going to have a major responsibility to the people of God. Did he have it all worked out? Nope. Did he do it perfectly? Not even close. But he knew there was a responsibility for the people of God. I'm just gonna say it now because I want us to sit in it just for a second. Every one of you, if you've put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, it is an amazing gift of grace. It's an amazing gift, but you need to understand, it is not meant to be lived out individually. We are part of something larger, which is called the church, the people of God. We are the body of Christ. We are the bride of Christ. We are brothers and sisters, right? I remember Dr. Shields at Hardin-Simmons University. When I would go in, he didn't call me Russell. He didn't call me Mr. Johnson. He would call me Brother Johnson in his high voice. And I used to think, man, that's cringy. But he couldn't have been more right. Because that's what we were. Brothers and sisters because of Jesus Christ. And here's what's even crazier. You ready? You have a responsibility to the body. You have a responsibility to the body. Now, you might be thinking, I'm not called to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. You're right, we're not. But we are called to use our gifts, to share each other's burdens, to care for one another, to love, celebrate, speak to each other in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, Ephesians 5:19. We're supposed to speak encouraging words. We're supposed to not forsake the gathering together, as some are in the habit of doing, but to encourage one another even more as we see the day approaching. At the end of the day, some of you are thinking, Russell, why do you think I'm here today? If I was going to do this on my own, I could have sat in my living room in my PJs and watched on TV, right? I hope none of us are here for a check mark. I hope none of us are here just to say I showed up. I hope we're here to know that we play a vital role in the body of Christ. And we have a responsibility to play. And my question for you is, what's yours? For Moses, it was to be the deliverer. For some of us, it might just be to love on our kids or to help somebody in a time of need or to be that prayer warrior for somebody who absolutely needs it right now. What's your role? Have you taken your responsibility in it? And when I think about the people who are hearing this for the first time, when I think about the people who are in Rome, who are under persecution, and they're having to deal with this whole thing of do we throw in the towel, and they're hearing about Moses, and they're hearing about him identifying with the slaves, the people who are being persecuted and treated poorly. And here's Moses not saying, I'm going to stay in the nice comfort of it all, but rather Moses is saying, I'm putting on the gear and identifying with them. I wonder if they thought, we did that once. We can do it again. Hebrews 10 said they were sharers in the persecution. Sharing with it. Would you share with it? Is the body that important to you that you would share in someone's tribulation? Share in someone's pain? Or when the going gets rough, do we just pull the hoodie off and say, no, I'm on the other team? Moses here, he's in. You might sit back and say, well, why? Look at what he says. He says this in verse 24. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasure of sin. I don't know if that's I don't really know if that's lust or all the junk that went with Egypt. I just think the author of Hebrews is saying, if you identify with the people of God, he was choosing that rather than not identifying with them. So here he's choosing to endure that ill treatment. And then look at verse 26, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasure of Egypt, for he was looking to that reward. There are two things in this passage, there's others, but there are two things that keep us from really taking our responsibility seriously when it comes to the body. And they're this, the allure of the world, which is the treasures of Egypt, and the coercion of the world, which is hardship, persecution. When we look at the world and it's calling to us with all of its stuff, when lust of the eye and lust of the flesh and pride of life is saying, come and enjoy, what we're saying is, are we going to choose that, or are we going to choose the body of Christ? Or when it comes time for persecution, when it comes time for hardship, when it comes time for suffering, are we going to endure that, or are we going to go for ease and comfort? And the hard part is, man, in the States, we haven't even really touched coercion yet, have we? Right? It's pretty good here. I was in Central Asia a couple of months ago, and we're having to meet in private. Show up at this long table in somebody's house, and we all had to come in at staggered times to not draw attention to it. And there's food on the table, and I begin to pour a cup of tea, and they're like, no, don't worry about that. He goes, food's on the table just in case somebody barges in and wants to know what we're doing. I'm like, oh, this is real. You sign up for that? You sign up for that? Man, it's one thing when the world is saying, come and enjoy, or when the world is saying, you better not. What's our responsibility to the body going to look like then? What's our responsibility to fellowship with Christ going to look like then? We're going to hide. Man, we get this beautiful picture of Moses choosing Christ. It says in verse 24, he had grown up refusing to be called the son of Pharaoh. Refusing in the original language in Greek, it's the word deny, like in Luke 9, 23 and 24. When it says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny or refuse himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever follows me will save it, right? That's that word, denial. Right before that, he asked Peter, he said, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. You are the one we've been waiting for. And then Jesus says, it's going to cost. It's going to cost. And poor Peter, he yanked the hoodie off in a hurry, didn't he? You know him? Nope. You know him? Nope. You know him? Nope. And where were the rest of them while Jesus was being crucified and beaten and mocked? While the world was twisting the arm behind the back, where was the rest of them? Hiding behind a locked door, scared they were going to be next. Right? Deny yourself, take up your cross. Moses is doing that, and so much more to talk about. I'm out of time. Let me give you verse 26. It all hinges on this. He considered the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasure of Egypt. Man, the name Christ there, it just sticks out like a sore thumb, because if you know your Bible, you know Jesus and Moses, like they didn't coexist, right? So how in the world do we have Christ in this passage, and how did Moses consider him? I would love to talk about this for a really long time, but all I can do is just a few minutes here. I think the name Christ shows up as an anachronism. An anachronism is when you have a person or an object who is placed in literature or in media and they're out of their context. For example, if you're watching a Viking show and you see a Starbucks cup on the table, that's an anachronism. You look at that and say, that doesn't belong there because Starbucks weren't around when Vikings were going, right? Or when somebody's wearing a digital watch during the Revolutionary War. Wrong. Those are just editing mistakes. But sometimes people in art will put the anachronism in there to draw your attention to it. Let me show you a painting by a guy named Murillo. He painted this in the 17th century. This is St. Francis of Assisi, who lived in the 1600s. And who is he embracing? Now, you all get it. The point of the painting is to show that St. Francis loved and embraced Jesus Christ. It doesn't take a genius to know they were 1,600 years apart, right? He's drawing your attention to something. I think the writer of Hebrews is doing the exact same thing by anachronistically putting Christ into the deal to say, yeah, did Moses know exactly who Jesus was? No, but he knew that there was going to be a guy better than him following. And he knew that there was going to be a Messiah, an anointed one, a Mashiach, a Christ to come. And that anointed one was so identified with the body of Christ, was so identified with the people of God that there was reproach in it. And Moses was saying, I know that there is more to this life than Egypt. I know that there is more to come that I can't see. I know that there is more ahead of me. And we've said that this entire series. So I'm not going to tell you again. I'm not going to tell you again that there are rewards for those of us who faithfully follow. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you again that there are crowns. I'm not going to tell you again that all of our stuff is going to be laid before Jesus Christ at the judgment seat, and it's either going to be wood, hay, and stubble or gold, silver, and precious jewels. I'm not going to tell you that again because we've said it every week. I'm not going to tell you that there's a heavenly city that we are waiting for and it's going to be great. I'm not going to tell you anymore, right? We've done it. We've covered it. And so here's Moses looking ahead, even though Egypt had everything to offer. Everything. He looked at the people of God and said, I'm with them. I'm with them. So, are you with the people of God? Are you? Are you with them? Are you with us? I tell you to look around, but we're a motley looking crew here, right? We all got our idiosyncrasies and we got our stuff, and half of you probably wouldn't want to say hi to me in public anyway because I'm just me, right? But listen, man, we're the body. And we have a responsibility to one another. And we don't want the world to allure us away from it or coerce us away from it. So I think about those people in the first century who were thinking, we did it once before. We can do it again. We can endure again.